QolorTOPIX Light Conversions podcast series by City Theatrical features some of the most unique lighting professionals in the entertainment lighting business. QolorTOPIX conversations range from every sector of light, from film and video to television, theater, dance, music, themed entertainment, art, architecture, and more. QolorTOPIX is hosted by the City Theatrical Marketing team. The podcast series will explore the lives of amazing practitioners of light with the goal of discussing their careers, projects, favorite tools, and vision for the future of the lighting industry. Hello, and welcome to QolorTOPIX, City Theatrical's Light Conversations podcast series. My name is Jackie Moriali, and I am representing the City Theatrical Marketing team. I am joined today by Michael Chybowski, who is a lighting designer, author, and educator in the theater arts. Michael has received an American Theater Wing Design Award, an Obie Award for Sustained Excellence, 2 Lucille Lortel Awards for his work in New York, and a Drama Desk nomination for his work on the original production of Wit, the Pulitzer Prize winning play at the Union Square Theater in New York. Michael also designed the subsequent U.S. national tour and its London West End productions. So to start, Michael, can you please tell us a bit more about yourself, including your full name and the place where you call home?
Michael Chybowski. I currently live in Coventry, Connecticut. I spent many years in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, which was a very peaceful place with some of the best coffee in New York.
Absolutely. So how many years have you been designing lighting for theater, dance, and beyond?
Well, I had to think about it. I think I lit my first show in 1977 in college and quickly found out I didn't know quite as much as I thought I did.
1977. I bet lighting was very different back then.
I'm not so sure. Same ideas, different equipment. That was before even Altman's. We were still using die-cast aluminum strand ellipsoidals.
Wow. Help me quantify this. So we're talking 40-something years in lighting design.
That's 23 and 25 is 48 years, yeah.
48 years in lighting design.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your favorite show of all time?
There's a tie at the top, but I would have to say probably my favorite is a production of Parsifal that I got to work on at Seattle Opera. The second and third, or like you really can't rank them that way, or anything I did with Laurie Anderson and anything I did with the Mark Morris Dance Group.
Very nice. Does that include favorite project that you've ever worked on? Would one of those be it?
The Laurie ones were probably the Nerve Bible and Stories from the Nerve Bible. With Mark, the dance called Grand Duo kind of rises to the top, as well as a film that we made called Falling Downstairs.
Very cool. I've seen the photos on your website. It looks beautiful. So I can see why that's among your favorite projects.
Thank you.
What is your favorite course to teach?
I teach a course in lighting design for what I call hybrid theater or non-traditional performance. Lighting design for projects that really don't have a category. Some examples are, I had worked with Isaac Mizrahi with Mark Morris's company, and he was doing his first ready-to-wear fashion show in 10 years. Although I didn't know it at the time. I got an email from him one day that said, Michael, I got this idea for a fashion show and none of the fashion lighting designers will know what I'm talking about. Do you want to try?
I'm going to take in the big guns. Wow. So how was the show for Isaac Mizrahi? That must have been a cool project.
He had this idea that he wanted the models to come out in first ultraviolet light, second kind of yellow light that he had seen at an installation at the Museum of Modern Art where you can see, but you can only see white and black and gray.
Ooh.
And then they would walk through that and then go into the runway, which was all stage light, and suddenly the color would explode. I basically had to reverse engineer what had been at the Museum of Modern Art and design the fixtures and track down all the people to fabricate them.
How interesting. So it was a light installation, I guess, at the Museum of Modern Art?
That was what Isaac had seen. And he wanted to have the same kind of light. It turned out to be a thing called low-pressure sodium that people don't use anymore because it only emits one wavelength of light, 789 nanometers.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. But it gives you this incredible look that's so unique to itself, huh?
Unless you're wearing yellow, which is what that is, then you can't tell what color anything it is because there's nothing for the pigment that's enclosed to reflect.
It must have looked so interesting with the clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting project. Okay, so let's take it to the really serious stuff here. What
Uh,
is your favorite tech table snack?
I tend not to eat sugar because I crash in the middle
Okay.
of a call, and that's the last thing I want.
Yes.
I mean, I guess jelly beans would probably be it if I had to say anything.
Oh, jelly beans. How interesting. Okay. Well, now I know.
Mhm.
Favorite book, and it can't be your own, although it obviously should be, but what would be your second up?
I tend to really enjoy things about the history of science. That's a little bit how I got in here. It's like the history of math, the history of nuclear physics, the history of particle physics, the history of quantum mechanics are what led me to wonder about does lighting design have the same kind of development process?
So you very much think and research and write very deeply about lighting design and the world of lighting. So let's talk more about your recent book, What is Lighting Design? A Genealogy of People and Ideas. You just kind of led the way into this, your research in math and science and physics. So why? Why did you write this book?
I guess the short story is I wanted to be a math major, and that's what I was when I got into college. But a bunch of friends of mine had been in the high school drama club, and I had never been able to work on the shows, but I was in the theater by myself one afternoon, and I saw this little ladder down left, and I thought, I wonder what that goes to, because there was a door. So I climbed up it and opened the door, and there was this big room full of the old auto transformer dimmers, and I just thought it was the most amazing thing ever. When I got to college, I signed up for all my math classes and then looked on the campus map and found the theater. And I wandered over there and walked in, and there were some people working. And I said, "Can we help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to learn about lighting." And they said, "Okay." And
You're
I
in.
and I pretty much never left. I mean, it was about a year and a half into it is when I designed my first show, and I had such a terrible time because realized I didn't know anything. But when it was over, I realized that if I could have that much fun having such a terrible time, there must be something to do this.
So what an experience. So the theater bug bit you and you were in and lighting was your thing.
Where that led to, though, is when I was in grad school. I mean, I had always wondered, like, who thought of all this with all the mathematics stuff. So I had one open slot in graduate school, and I thumbed through the catalog, and I happened upon a history of mathematics course.
Interesting.
So I took that. I had so much fun. I would just go hang out in the history of mathematics library in the afternoon and pull books off the shelf at random.
So is that what kind of fed into some of your earlier chapters in the book that really delve into the history of lighting?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, mathematics underwent the same developmental process from the Renaissance on. In the 1200s, a comprehensive formal education in mathematics was the first three books of Euclid's Elements that was written about 350 BC. And there's 36 books. So they were a little far behind. Like no original mathematics had been done in about 1200 years.
Is this light reading for you, the 36 books from Euclid from
No,
350 BC?
no,
I'm
no.
already impressed, but now I'm more.
But no, the
So
geometry and lighting design have a lot in common.
yes. So I know that you're a writer, you're also an avid reader. What is your process for writing like? Or more specifically for this book? What was your timeline? What was your process? Talk me
Right.
through it.
I first had the idea around 2002, 2003, maybe. So I started to do some research at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts over the early interweb. And then I interviewed Jules Fisher, Jennifer, Jim Ingalls, Joshua White, who did the Joshua Light shows at the Fillmore East in the 60s, because I met him when I was working on a show. My original idea was to do it by designer and figure out what each individual designer contributed. And that was just too daunting an idea because I would have had to go everywhere and spend a month in every archive I could find.
At least. I'm holding a copy of Appendix 1, which is the genealogy of American lighting designers. And I'm just curious. So, this amazing family tree, as it were, of lighting designers and came in as first generation, second generation, third generation to now. Was this kind of the launching pad, or was the research that went into the actual writing? How did you start?
Well, I think I had always been curious about the family tree. I had asked Jennifer about that, way back at the beginning. And she wrote, 5 names on a little piece of paper and handed it to me. And that was probably the genesis or, the starting point.
It's so interesting how you mapped different people with each other. And it sounds like you worked with many of them on different projects over the years. So when
Mhm.
you first started interviewing folks that you were working with or in New York City or wherever they were working around the world, were they just basically connections that you had worked with, or did you reach out knowing that you wanted to put together a genealogy map like this?
At first, it was individual people that I knew really well. I sort of had a list, and then I couldn't figure out actually how to organize the book, going through it by individual designers. I mean, there were a few who were sort of seminal, and a lot who just added like one thing or two things or things like that. And it just seemed like I can't do it.
I see your name, right, to the Yale School of Drama 87 list, not to expose your graduation year, but I love to see that. And I went through it with a highlighter and
Mhm.
circled everybody that we at City Theatrical have encountered and worked with and interviewed. And I love it. It took such a long time to go through it name by name. So I could only imagine what went into putting it together. Years and years, and you're still updating it.
Yeah, when I finally figured out how to organize the book and put together the book proposal and got it approved, which was about 2017, I think, sometime in there, I started writing everybody I knew, basically, and said, like, where do you come from? Who trained you? Who are your assistants?
Exactly. Is most of it starting with the education, or does it kind of flow into assistantships and who worked for who on Broadway or on various shows, or is it just more organic than that?
I think it's more organic than that. Before maybe 1982, most people who established themselves in the profession didn't go to school. So I was like right on the edge because I remember when I was trying to figure out if I should go to grad school, Pat Collins was doing a show where I was working in Alaska, and I like said, okay, now's my chance. I'm going to ask her. So I sat her down and bought her coffee and, asked her if I should just move to New York and try to assist or go to grad school. Her first response was, why do you want to do this? Do you know how hard this is? She actually recommended assisting, just like skip the grad school route. I later found out, I think she had been at Yale for a year and then decided that wasn't for her and moved to New York in the mid 50s. Since about 1982 or so, it's switched over gradually to just starting out as an assistant is really almost impossible. You just need a leg up before you get there.
Yeah. I guess everybody gives advice to the best of their ability. It sounds like you knew the right answer for you and it worked for you and definitely gave you a leg up. And after many years of many different projects, it sounds like it was the right path for you.
It worked. I mean, I graduated into the 87 stock market crash and the AIDS epidemic. It was 5 tough years of trying to just meet enough people.
Mm-hmm.
You would do shows with people and then they would die. In our theaters, there used to be a network of $500 shows that would get passed down from the people that were a couple of years ahead of you in grad school. And then half the theaters closed in 1988.
Mm-hmm. Scary
So,
times. Sounds like if you made it through and you really loved it and you honed your craft, then from those 5 years became so many more and wonderful experiences. Yeah.
yes. I mean, I had a lot of help.
I'm just curious, are there any special times, memories, experiences, people other than Pat who kind of pointed you in the direction of writing this book?
Not the writing of the book. This is just something that I'm really interested in how people have ideas and how complexity forms. I mean, if I had another life, I would probably try to join the Santa Fe Institute because they study complexity.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
People as complex characters, basically, and what makes them, right?
Or complex systems. Like one of the founders of it back in the mid 70s, I think, was Murray Gell-Mann, who was one of the people who discovered quarks.
Hmm,
And he got bored with quantum physics and wanted to study complexity instead.
interesting. That would be a change.
Mhm.
So this school was founded on this concept, this person finding quirks and going into complexity. So what would interest you by way of complexity as a lighting designer?
Just how ideas form and how they interlock with other ideas to form bigger ideas.
Hmm. Does it have to do with influences from other people or
Uh,
things or just within oneself?
all of the sciences and all of mathematics and probably all art or any kind of human endeavor is built on something that somebody else thought of, and then something happens and a new way of thinking about it happens. And then, there's a reaction against it. And then there's a few people who go, wait a minute, there might be something to that. And a new structure happens.
So I think in your book you have a really good finger on the pulse of history in terms of trends and theories and how lighting has changed the way that we think about things and theater. Were there any particular trends that you found in your research or theories that were really interesting to you?
The research really clarified something for me that I didn't really understand before I started. We're sort of in the third version of what lighting design is about, and it's all based on what the dominant culture thinks is important. In the Renaissance, light meant freedom and knowledge and joy because people were free to think again and explore again after 1,000 years of, you must not. And that kind of reached its peak in the Baroque, where it was just exuberance, exuberance. And then along came Isaac Newton, who he figured out how gravity worked. And there was a rule for it, and we could all understand it. And it was so popular that there was even books published called Newtonianism for Ladies.
Ooh, just for the ladies, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was amazing to me how much detail that you went into, talking about some of the older periods, right? Going through the Renaissance to Baroque, et cetera. I remember a detail about quantifying color based on locations, like a sunset in Naples, I think you had as an example, and such specific examples of light and mirroring nature and different ways of thinking about it and how it affects stage overall scenery. I'm just curious, what are some of the important takeaways that you want your readers to have gotten from this book? Because there's so much information there.
Here's an example, and it actually continues the thread that we were just talking about. So we had light as exuberance and freedom and joy. And then after Newton, everybody started going, nature, nature, we have to study nature. People wanted to replicate natural light. And that was the big goal. And then right when that all was almost possible in the early electric era, there was another group of people who went, want nothing to do with that. We want to use light as architecture, as to express thought, to explore what's going on in people's minds instead, to reflect that, which is the beginning of what we do. That's been developing, since around Adolf Appia, like the turn of the 20th century. And I guess the trend has been towards having absolute control of the light over the stage. And now that we've gotten there, I think what I want people to take away from that is that the realism is a tiny, tiny subset. It's an infinite subset, but it's a tiny subset of what's possible with light. There's a vast realm of possibilities. The only thing that limits it is how well you think.
That's so interesting. Going back in history now, this trend that was different, that was looking internally, are there any components of that interest you in your own lighting design now?
There was a quote from Jean Rosenthal in her book that she published just before she died, where she was looking back on the history of lighting design in her lifetime. And she was saying that during the Depression, when they didn't have any money for scenery, they had to rely on lighting. She was saying that the pool of light is the beginning of modern lighting design, coming from behind, in front, the side, from any angle, gives its own plasticity and form and communicates by itself. I mean, I think that's what I'm talking about. And then another quote from Alaska's electrician, where he said that nothing gets over the footlights more speedily than thought, right?
Speaking of Jean Rosenthal, as a woman in lighting, I was drawn to her quote on page 304. When I began my career, the theater had accepted women as stars, set designers, stage managers, etc., had remained a closed male world. Only real weapon in the battle for acceptance was knowledge. And I knew my stuff, and I knew the technicians knew this, and I honored truly their knowledge and their prerogatives. Gradually, they came around. I can only imagine what it was like for her in this field, trying to make this possible for other young lighting designers, let alone women in lighting design. I appreciate the complexity and people who went out there like Jean Rosenthal to break barriers and change things in the way that we think about our craft, and people like you who write about it and honor them and have made an effort to talk about this in such depth that it's not just about the aesthetic, it's about the thinking that goes into the lighting process. And I'm just very happy to meet you and listen to you and think more on it. Then I know that your work is beautiful when I look at pictures, but to think about what goes into it and the thought process and what you're trying to do is really beautiful to hear.
Thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
One of the interesting things about women lighting designers, just talking about this the other day because it's pervasive in our culture now. Theron Musser was quoted as saying that the reason that women were lighting designers is because it didn't pay. It's like a man couldn't raise a family on what you could earn as a lighting designer. So that's why women ended up doing it. And when I was graduating from college, I think, and thinking about going to grad school, I was actually worried because all of the really giant lighting designers like Theron and Jennifer and Beverly Emmons and all that crowd, they outnumbered the men like 3-1.
Interesting.
And I was worried that because I was born male, I wouldn't be as good a lighting designer as I wanted to be.
Interesting.
One more thought on that is that the weird thing that happened was that like lighting design became a legitimate profession sometime around 1980. Before that, it was, the parents would go, "What? No, you're not doing that." And then by about 1990, all the big designers were men. Men
That's
had
interesting.
completely taken over. And I think we're shifting back. I think that especially with the union, like investing heavily in supporting women, supporting people from marginalized communities, I think that's a giant, giant step in trying to open this back up again.
I think equity is a wonderful thing to have in lighting design and theater
Mhm.
across the board. Speaking of inclusion, I am not a lighting designer by background, by education. I've been very fortunate to learn my way as working with City Theatrical for the past 8 years. And even still, I have thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. I'm trying to think big. I think everybody who's a lighting student or a lighting professional in any way should read your book. But I'm just curious, are there any other design styles or professionals that should be reading this book and your genealogy of lighting design?
I mean, I didn't want it to be just a textbook. It was written for anybody who's curious about this. I definitely think it would help some directors, choreographers, other designers. A lot of people think that lighting design is like voodoo. They have no idea what you're doing with that, thing on your head and what you're mumbling. Anybody who thinks lighting design is voodoo, I think
Should read this book.
yes.
Maybe some mathematicians out there too. I was,
Maybe.
thinking since your background is in math or science.
Yeah. No, I wanted to write it like a detective story.
Interesting. Yeah,
Mhm.
to
Like,
try to get to the bottom of it.
uh-huh.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I'm looking forward to what's next from you. So I'm wondering, since writing this book, what is lighting design, a genealogy of people and ideas? Is there anything in particular that you are interested in researching or writing about next?
One of the things that became really clear when I was writing it is that lighting design is wholly a product of the Western approach to education and art. There's something fundamental about the way the Western cultures thinks about light and shadow. The artist Caravaggio, everybody looks at that and looks and says, "Oh, how dramatic."
Based on the contrast.
Yeah. And I think that's that and Euclid's elements, geometry, if you combine those two things and as well as perspective painting, you end up where we are.
Interesting.
So I'm just curious. how these kinds of ideas translate into different cultures who have different ways of looking at light.
So are you interested in Eastern perspectives or just other than Western perspectives and how it's been used over
Just
history?
just other than Western. I mean, here's an example. When I was at Jacob's Pillow with Mark's company for like they asked me to do a little workshop, lighting workshop for the interns every summer. So we would go through, pull all the color and just go through the rep plot and show everybody what each angle did. And when we got to the diagonals, the diagonal backlight from upright elicited a different response than up left. Like upright always felt like either God or the sun, and up left was always slightly diabolical or menacing. And it was different for the people that were raised in the West and the people who were from the Far East. It was the opposite. And I didn't know whether that was because that's the way they're trained to read or what. But I would like to set up a rep plot and do that again in a kind of controlled environment with some psychologists or some neuroscientists and try to figure out like what's up.
I would love to read that study. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes a scientific study where you can
Mm-hmm.
gauge reactions based on the person's perspective. And
Mm-hmm. I was just interviewing a potential grad student the other day, and he's from Nigeria. So I asked him to describe how they use light there. A lot of it was color coding. Like clear light is happy or joyous. Red light, they light red scenes because they want people to feel a sense of menace or danger. We wouldn't do that at all because we would say
mm,
we're telegraphing, we're telling the audience how to think. So it's a really just a completely different way of looking at it.
well, I hope that you work with this person. Sounds
Yeah.
like a very interesting perspective.
Mhm.
So let's talk about you as a designer.
Mhm.
So, how would you describe your lighting aesthetic?
Well, when I first read the question, I thought, I'm a chameleon. I try not to have one, right? Because every project demands something else.
Well, and I thought you were going to say that because the end of your book, you say that you have to be able to see and be aware, right? So naturally, every project would be a little different. And even just browsing through your photos, you're absolutely able to adapt to whatever the content of that show is. But if you had to put it in 3 words or a sentence, if I really,
Uh, yeah, I knew that wouldn't go over big, but I mean, I think that I'm very geometric. I think of space in 3 dimensions. When I walk into a theater after I've done the plot, I can look up and actually see like a wireframe diagram of how the light can travel.
Yes.
I'm also interested in just the quality of the air, especially with color mixing, which I'm not very good at compared to people who were trained before computers. I guess aesthetically, I tend to be very active. I don't look at lighting design as storytelling. I think that's bunk. I try to build a world where whatever behavior is happening seems inevitable, if that makes any sense. Whatever quality the world has, you can see the people acting in it and think, oh, of course they're doing that because the world is like this.
Exactly. Because
Mhm.
you've created that world with light.
Yeah. Mhm.
The air quality is so it just piqued my interest. So I know that you've worked in Alaska, right, which is very different than Midtown Manhattan. Are there any air quality differences that you've noticed in different places around the world that affect your design plot or how you go about lighting those behaviors and bringing them to life?
I try to have a visual, like I'm not as good as Jean Rosenthal. She said she used to take mental snapshots and then she could like kind of download them to print whenever she needed to use them.
Wow.
I noticed I was on tour in Australia and we went to this place called Kangaroo Island for the afternoon. And they had this promontory called the Remarkable Rocks. So we climbed up there, and yes, the rocks were remarkable. But we were looking out over the southern Pacific Ocean, and it reminded me a lot of what the water was like and the air was like in La Jolla.
Interesting in California.
Yeah. And
I'm just curious, were there kangaroos on Kangaroo Island? I need to
of course,
know. Of
yes.
course there were.
There were nice tame parking lot kangaroos, and there were pretty nasty wild ones.
Oh my goodness. That is a totally different world down there, huh?
Hmm.
So then the air quality when you're looking at the ocean there somehow reminded you of La Jolla.
Yeah, kind of the crystalline quality of it.
Wow, beautiful.
I left Alaska in 1984 to go to grad school, and I came back in like 1992 to tour with a dance company. And as soon as the plane door opened, I got automatically high because it smells like no other place. It just like brought all this sensory impressions back.
Can only imagine. So just getting off the plane after not having been there for all those years, it
Hmm.
brought everything back immediately.
Yeah.
Are there any common elements that you bring from that dance show in Alaska to another dance show or from one theater in La Jolla to Australia or New York? Or are there any common elements that go from one show to another with you?
It's a two-part answer, probably. One is probably the most fun I've ever had in my career is during the times when I would be lighting a normal show, a normal play one week, and then right after that, I was like wandering over and doing a show with Laurie Anderson, and then I was flying out to do some kind of regional opera, and then I was flying back to New York to light a dance for Mark Morris's company, and then go to do a piece of regional theater right after that. Each has a different need, I guess. So like some are based on words, some are based on music, some are based on neither. You're trying to evoke kind of a mental space more than anything else. But I think the interesting thing is to be able to cross-pollinate between all those different kinds of things and bring something from this dance piece you did to this realistic play that you're doing next. And so using angle or the way you're mixing color in the same way. So having just like things, everything's kind of weave together.
So, as someone who's always been very into his education,
Mhm.
do you learn something from each of your projects that you do that you kind of pull from one to the next? Is that what I'm kind of reading between the lines?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Interesting.
yeah, a friend of mine, ML Geiger, who teaches at NYU, said that the only way you learn how to light shows is to light shows.
Yep.
But if you don't learn something on every show, then you're not trying hard enough.
Makes sense to me. Speaking of learning and your aesthetic and your mind space when you're going into designing a show, is there a certain lighting method or medium that you prefer to work with, or just a type of show that you really like doing?
Every new show is a different situation with a different group of people with a different objective. And it's pretty much you walk into the room going, okay, how do you want me to think about this? Just trying to be as open as possible.
So, do you enjoy the collaboration process? I know theater is a big collaboration.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Hmm.
Um, there are many, many shows to choose from. You already told us about some of your favorites. Now let's talk about the people. So, do you have any teams that you really love to collaborate with?
I've probably lit somewhere between 55 and 60 of Mark Morris's dances. And sometimes he does nothing more than listen to the music and come back and talk to me about it or tell me what you think. And then he'll go, oh, okay, that sounds good.
Wonderful experience, obviously, working with
Hmm.
Mark Morris. Yeah.
Yeah, and same with Lori. I mean, the Lori, it takes like 10 people to keep up with her. When I was working on Moby Dick, I guess she got stuck in one section of it. So we had a little meeting, and there, the projection people that are, and the sound people, and the lighting people, and the set people, like all the people were there, and we were all talking about it, making suggestions, and then we noticed that she had her eyes were out of focus, and she had sort of drifted off. So we all stopped talking, and
Ooh.
after a few seconds, she just sort of came back and said, "I think we should do this." And it was some synthesis of everything everybody had said, but it was like only Lori would think of that. And everybody was like, "Oh, that's why you're Laurie Anderson."
She just got it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's really kind of special to be able to to be around that. She never stops, and she's always thinking and thinking and trying to like figure out what makes this special, what makes this unique, what makes this different from anything I've seen before. You get a call from her every couple of months, and it's like, come over to the studio. I'm going to show you what I'm doing with the projections. So you come over, and she shows you, and she does a like a little thumbnail prints of everything, and off you go to think about them. And then 2 months later, you get another phone call, and you go back, and the same thing happens, except everything is denser and more interesting. And then that happens a third time, and like a fair amount of things have changed, but it's like growing in front of your eyes.
It sounds like you love to work with people who really challenge you and make you think and grow along with you and help you to make the best possible design for the project.
Yeah, I do. I do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I find it frustrating when people kind of go, well, I don't know, you're the lighting designer, you figure it out.
Thanks. So look,
Okay.
it's such a collaboration, right? So
Uh,
how could you possibly work in a vacuum in that way? I'm sure you have solved many lighting problems,
yeah.
but it's a really nice feeling to work with a team of people that you respect and who challenge you to be better and grow and evolve.
Mhm,
So let's talk about the tech.
mhm.
Let's talk about City Theatrical tech. Why not, right?
Uh-huh.
Which City Theatrical products have you used,
Mhm.
and which are your favorites?
The beam bender is probably my favorite. I think the just from touring and dance, when you can never get the shins low enough, and all the dancers have socks, and then everybody's coming to you and going, "Why do they have socks?" And there's nothing you can do about it. And like I think the Joyce Theater had beam benders from like the second they came out, and just
Yes,
walking in there and being able to turn the shins on and go, "Oh, that's the way it's supposed to be."
that's the way it's supposed to look. Yep, the
Uh,
dancer's legs illuminated. Love it.
their feet too.
The feet too.
Yeah. And I also used them in a Beckett production of all things because there was no room to hide a light unless I hung it straight down. But I had to light nothing but their mouth.
So you had a tight spot to mount it and a very tight area to light. So the beam
Yeah.
bender pulled through. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Hmm.
See that?
I don't know. I think the auto yoke was probably the sturdiest, most reliable version of that kind of thing that I've ever used.
We have a lot of fans of the auto yoke. It was very sad to make that product legacy a couple of years ago, but
Hmm.
it's nice to hear that you're still a fan and it's one of your top
Hmm.
products from City Theatrical.
Yeah.
One of our first innovations, really.
Mhm.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for using our stuff. I'm so glad that our beam benders are working for you. And I'm just curious because you have so much going on and so many projects and books and I research. I can't wait to see what's next. Going forward, are there any trends in lighting technology that you're tracking or would be interested to see how they develop in terms of technology?
Probably I'm no different than just about every lighting designer on the planet. I'd like a full spectrum LED array.
Yep.
I'm so tired of ice cold light.
Sounds good. We got to warm it up. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it was a big jump from a 1K Altman to a Source 4. I mean we lost a lot of I don't know, not humanity, but of the ability to make people not look gray.
Have you used the Source 4 LED?
A little bit, yeah. It's the threes are better than the twos in terms of just the ability to have distinguishable tints. And
Absolutely.
yeah, they're more delicate, which is nice.
So if you had a magic wand, is there any one single piece of new lighting gear that you would like to see on the market next year?
That would be it, really. I mean, that would cure a lot of angst, is the ability to make people look human and to have a much finer range of color rendition within that. So yeah, a full full spectrum LED array that's affordable.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll put in a good word.
I'll just wave my
Wave the wand.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Just as we kind of wrap it up, do you have any shout outs that you'd like to make to collaborators, mentors, students, other folks that you've worked with or who have helped you out along the way?
Well, I think the helping me out along the way, Jennifer, obviously, Richard Nelson, who passed away in the late 90s, was a giant, giant help. Jim Ingalls was a giant, giant help. Mark Morris and his company, Lori. And then I think more personally, like ML Geiger was a couple of years ahead of me at Yale, and she helped me a lot with the transition to New York. Longtime assistant by the name of Dale Noth, who moved into television lighting, and the set designer Neil Patel, I think, who's been a very close friend and collaborator since 95, I think 30 years.
Wow. I mean, again, I'm looking at this genealogy of American lighting designers, and have you met each and every one of these folks in person or had any communication with every single one of them, maybe some of the next gen or
Well, I mean, I'm not that old. Like I never knew Gene Rosenthal or Peggy Clark, um, even though they were alive during my lifetime. Or Abe Federer didn't die that long ago, but I never met him.
Mhm.
Uh, I think Pat Collins I knew, Jules I know, Tom Skelton I talked with once on the phone. I think I was trying to see if he had any information about this dance I was supposed to recreate, and he said, "Nope, don't have any. Good luck."
Thanks.
He was very charming about it.
Okay, well, there you go. I mean, I'm just curious because there's so many people of influence here that have come together, and it's so nice to see how just a couple of names at the top have really led to this burgeoning industry.
Yeah.
What about the next gen? I know you said you have a great associate who's transferred over to the TV lighting world. Are there any new faces of the next generation that we should look out for?
They show up every year. The National Design Portfolio Review and the Hemsley Portfolio Review are really that's where it's at pretty much.
Yep.
I think it's really exciting to see. I keep wanting to look at stuff and go, I want to see something I've never seen before.
So is there any advice that you would give to somebody who's going to the Helmsley Lighting Review and portfolio review that, something to give them an edge if they were to submit their portfolio?
I don't know. A friend of mine used to say, be bold, be daring, don't be shy. If you have an idea, just how do you make it as strong as possible? Don't water it down because you're afraid that people are going to get mad at you or look at you funny or anything like that. Anything that we revere today started off as somebody's experiment where they said, screw you, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it this way.
So again, we've come for full circle to your book. What is
Mhm.
lighting design, right? Where did these ideas come from? Where did these complex ways of thinking come from?
Mhm.
I can't wait to see what you do next. I would give you the exact same advice. I hope that you look beyond the Western view of lighting and keep pursuing your idea since you published this book and come out with the next one that'll really shape the next wave of the industry. And I wish you all the best. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with me today.
Well, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
You too. So, Michael, is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one thing that I spent a lot of time thinking about, relatively speaking. It's a quote from Joel Rubin's book, The History of the Development of Stage Lighting from 1900 to 1950, which was his PhD thesis at Stanford, that I stumbled on in the Yale Library when I was in school there. But there's a quote in there where he wrote it in 19, I think he published it in 1952, right when SCR dimmers were starting to infiltrate everything. And he said, it is difficult to postulate any vast change in stage lighting theory. Stage lighting is a limited art in that in its broadest application to play production, it can do little more than enhance the element of spectacle. Lighting equipment has tended more and more throughout the years to explore this utmost limitation of lighting theory. Thus, while the first half of the 20th century lighting theory was the most important factor in the stimulation of technological progress, in succeeding decades, this particular incentive will, in all probability, gradually disappear. With this important incentive lost, it will remain to be seen whether further technological progress in stage lighting apparatus will then degenerate into mere improvement for its own sake. This particular problem will be, it would seem, one for future generations of practitioners and inventors to solve.
Is this something that you feel is true and that this generation of practitioners is working on and trying to solve, or are we in a different direction?
I don't know. I mean, I think that even with all the fancy moving lights and optical systems and all of that, they're evolutionary steps in a basic idea that happened in 1930. And computers the same. It's insane how much control we have over everything. And the only limitation really is time.
Exactly. 100 years later, we're making steps towards the same trend that has been in place.
Pretty much.
I'm hearing.
Yeah. So yeah, since 1952 when he wrote this. I mean, it's kind of my feeling that, like we've been through three kind of eras of lighting design, and I've been kind of looking around for something like the fourth for about 20 years. And I think theater itself, I think, is kind of stuck in a rut. And I think there needs to be something new. And I think it's going to depend on the way culture itself looks at light. Because that's the big shift that happened the last three times. So it has to be something that fundamental where people go, oh, it's not that, it's this.
Do you think we culturally are ready for that, for a shift in how we look at light?
It depends on what comes along. I've gotten like two glimmers of something where I've thought, oh, maybe that's it. And I think they both had something to do with the way we perceive time.
Okay.
Like Robert Wilson is great at slowing time down. The Worcester Group is great for suspending time. I did a little piece of my own where I was trying to provoke people into visualizing where time comes from. I think it's got something to do with that, but I don't know. It has to be able to have something to do with a way of communicating something fundamental.
Do you journal? I'm just curious.
No.
Oh, I think you should. I mean, just to keep track of all these great ideas and try to connect the dots. And I don't know, I would watch that movie. Well, thank you for sharing. And I really appreciate you coming on Color Topics with us today. I think that everybody and anybody who's interested in lighting of any kind and history of math, science, lighting, and how people shape their ideas and theories and how that passes along from generation to generation should absolutely buy your book, What is Lighting Design? A Genealogy of People and Ideas by Michael Chybowski, now available on Routledge.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. You too, Michael. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Color Topics Light Conversations podcast series. Please join us next time for another exciting conversation with one of our customers or collaborators. Have a great day.